Mobile hunters, are you looking to make the move to saddle hunting this year? Or maybe you just want to add a few new pieces of gear or upgrade your current saddle gear. If that's the case, then head over to tetherednation.com where they've got all mobile hunters covered. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old timer, Tethered is your one-stop saddle shop. From saddles to ropes, sticks, ascenders, whatever it is you need, they have you covered. I've personally been using their gear for the past 3 seasons now. My base setup consists of the Phantom saddle and the Predator platform. And if you're wondering why I've chosen to use their gear above all else, here's the cliff notes. They're innovative and pushing the mobile hunting forward overall. They cut no corners and prioritize the safety and performance of their gear. They care about the community that they've created, and their gear allows me to hunt free. And above all else, I like to support good people doing good work. If you're interested in upping your mobile hunting game, then head to tetherednation.com. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker? They're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truths from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 245. Today, we are joined by my buddy, Tony Peterson, and we're discussing how to take your deer hunting to the next level. So stay tuned.
What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. I am coming to you, might actually be the coolest place that I've done a podcast, up front at least, to date. I am actually out on my kayak. I am kayaking back to the truck after having had checked trail cameras all day, and the last couple I needed to check were water access, so left that for the end of the day. And got all the cameras pulled with the exception of one, and then on my way back there's a small little spot where I can do just a little bit of glassing, and I did see a young buck come out into a field. I don't know what it is. It's like, I think it's it looks like sorghum, maybe it's just really poorly planted corn, possibly, but regardless, good day pulling trail cameras. Actually, it was a good day pulling trail cameras because I was out in the woods, which is always nice. But the inventory on the cameras left a little to be desired. This is all stuff that is local to me. I haven't made it up to the Poconos yet. Hoping I can do that here in the next, 2-ish weeks or so. The season here for me locally comes in on the 18th of September, so I really needed to get out and get this stuff done. At least around my house. And then I got a little bit more time for the Poconos because that doesn't open until the normal statewide opener, which is right there at the beginning of October. I don't remember exactly what the date is off the top of my head, but doing a little bit of double duty here, or trying to be efficient with my time, podcasting while I'm on the kayak. That way when I get home I can kind of get everything together for the episode on Wednesday. But obviously the season is kicking off for a lot of folks with their western trips and stuff like that have already kind of started. I'm still, like I said, got a little bit of time left, so I'm still just getting dialed in, flinging arrows. Everything's dialed in, feeling good. If you're kind of last minute shopping or last minute considering making any changes or looking for broadheads or whatever the case is, you can head over to Afflictor broadheads.com and check those out. You can use the promo code TRUTH10 and that will get you a discount. I've been shooting them all this summer. I made the switch to those this year and they're awesome. They fly just like my field points. I've shot them out as far as to 53 yards. And they are dropping right where my field points are landing, so I couldn't be happier with those. I'm shooting the K2 fixed blade, but they've got a bunch of different a bunch of different options, everything from fixed to hybrid, whatever tickles your fancy, they've got you covered. So head over to afflictorbroadheads.com, use the promo code TRUTH10, and pick yourself up some killer broadheads. Also, while you're at it, be sure to head to the truthamstand.com or my Instagram page and check out the merch that we got going on. You can use the promo code TRUTH21, save yourself a little cash. And then the same thing with skullbrewcoffee.com. You can head over there, use the promo code TRUTH21, and save yourself some cash there. Got a cool show for you guys today. I have my buddy Tony Peterson on. He has been on, I think this is his third time being on. But Tony's been doing a ton of work with the guys over at Meat Eater, specifically Wired to Hunt, doing a lot of writing. All of his whitetail stuff is on Wired to Hunt right now, and he's doing the Foundations podcast on the Wired to Hunt channel as well, which is killer. Whether you're someone who's been doing it for a while or someone who's just new getting into it and want to up your game, he does a really good job of kind of laying out some of the more intrinsic, I guess, ideas around deer hunting that maybe maybe on this show and shows like this that we gloss over it because it's things that maybe we kind of know or the guests know, and we don't stop and think about. Not everyone that's listening to this podcast has been doing this for a long time, and they might need someone to kind of walk them through a little bit more specifically. And that's kind of what Tony's doing on the Foundations podcast. But this podcast really kind of came about because Tony had written an article that's on meateater.com, and it was really talking about how to become a better bow hunter, a better deer hunter in general. And, there's no magic drug, magic pill, magic bullet, magic whatever, that the industry would like to sell you to make you believe that you now all of a sudden hold all the keys to the kingdom of big buck hunting. The reality is, and the way he kind of wrote the article is that, it's really just about learning as much as you can and being as diverse as you possibly can to ultimately up your game, which is one of the reasons why I've always liked to travel to hunt and hunt different places, see different things. And so he asked me for a quote or two for the article about my kind of perception on that kind of methodology of becoming a better bow hunter, and it got us to thinking maybe we should do a podcast about this. I'd been doing some research for a job interview that I was doing around cognitive development and specifically around Alzheimer's and what kind of goes on in the brain and how the brain works and how the brain learns and how it creates pathways to retain knowledge. And when a pathway gets blocked, if you only have one way that you understand something and that pathway is blocked, you no longer know it. That's why people who have, I'm not a doctor, but layman's terms, that's why people who have, for example, Alzheimer's might forget a family member because maybe they only know them one way, right? They know Bob the husband or Bob the uncle or whatever the case is. So the whole idea is that if you know Bob, like he's a brother, Bob's your friend, Bob's a hunter, Bob's a this or that, a couple different ways. If one of those pathways is blocked, you may not know Bob the hunter, but you may know Bob, your best friend. And so it gives you multiple ways to know something. So I started thinking about this in terms of deer hunting and and bow hunting and becoming a better bow hunter. And what it made me kind of think of is all these times, like I've talked about it before, where I have almost deja vu when I get to places, and I'm not unique in this. A lot of bow hunters or a lot of hunters will have this, where you see something, for example, when I was in Missouri and I'm hunting a river bottom, and I've never hunted a river bottom before, but I came up on this little spot that reminded me of a setup that I had in a swamp in Pennsylvania. And it just looked the same. The terrain laid out the same. It was just very eerily familiar. And I immediately knew kind of how to hunt it, where I needed to set up, what the wind was going to do. And that's really what knowing, diversifying yourself as much as possible. You're creating these analogs to where you can quickly recall information without ever having to have had been there or seen it, and just know how to hunt it. The guys that are next level at this, it's like, the Enfaults and the DeQuisto, Andre DeQuisto, like these guys, like when they talk about a sixth sense, it's really what it is. You just have this feeling, and because you've seen it before, and it might not have been specifically at that particular spot, even that state, that piece of property, whatever the case is, but you just know that this is where it needs to happen, and you immediately know how to hunt it. Doesn't mean you have to do it all on public land. It's just, it's learning new ground, whether it's learning another piece of private ground, or maybe you're hunting private and maybe you just go out and you scout public and you hunt it a little bit so you can kind of get some diversity or whatever the case is. But it's just always seeking out that next step of information and knowledge is really what this conversation is all about. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Tony. I always dig talking to him. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. With that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's podcast. And as always, I'd like to thank you all for listening.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand podcast. And you're going to immediately recognize the dulcet tones on the other end of the Skype line with me. I have one, my good buddy. I think you're now a third-time offender, which in some states means zero tolerance policy, which means you'd be
going away.
You're going away for good. I got my buddy Tony Peterson on. Man, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity now. You're every. At one point you were like my friend Tony Peterson, and now it's like whenever someone asks me something, like, "Hey, what'd you do yesterday?" It's like, "Oh, I talked to Tony Peterson." You know, the guy that is super famous now. No.
So can I tell you a story about that?
Yes.
Do you know Clay Newcomb at all?
I don't know him personally. I mean, I've listened to Bear Grease and I've watched him on the Rogan podcast that he did.
Yeah. So Clay, I've known Clay a long time, and Clay is awesome. Like, what you see is what you get. And I love the guy. He's awesome, but that little bromance he's going on with Steve Rinella right now, he is freaking blown up. You know, I mean, like, when I saw him on Rogan, I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah. And so I call him Clay Dashian because he's up there, man. He's like the most famous guy I know right now.
Right.
And so I'm okay with that. You can give me all the shit you want.
Right. I wonder if he ever thought bear hunting and making bear grease was ever going to get him on Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Well, I made a mistake. So I listened to Clay's episode, and then I looked at it came up in my YouTube feed for something. The episode did. And I looked at some of the comments, and people are so freaking stupid, dude. Like 80% of the comments were like, "Oh yeah, like this guy's not starting a bear grease like business, like, oh, of course he's going to be selling bear grease." I'm like, do you idiots know what it takes to get bear grease?
It's definitely not an efficient business. Like,
no, you're going to draw 3 tags a year. Yeah. You're going to sell out your whole supply that takes you freaking forever to make. Anyway, you're
going to sell it at the farmer's market for $3.50. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're not buying too many ivory back scratchers being in the bear grease business.
No, not at all. But man, I don't know him that well. He seems like a super good dude. He's articulate. As far as someone to represent our community, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone better. To do that. Yeah. He just comes across as genuine, seeking to learn, seeking knowledge. At every turn. I think part of what I found almost a little bit refreshing about him a little bit is when he doesn't know something, he will tell you he does not know something. Yep. He's not afraid of not knowing, Yeah. And that kind of that'll dovetail into a lot of what you and I are going to talk about today, not to bury the lead necessarily, but that's a lot of what our discussion is going to be about is about that ability to learn and knowledge gathering in different ways that people do that and stuff like that. But before we jump into all that, man, what's going on in Tony's world, dude? I know you're doing a lot of scouting right now. You got a couple little girls. You're trying to get on some deer this year. How's that going?
It is. I'm optimistic. Let me put it that way. Okay. I have. So our mutual friend Aaron Hepler's been texting me because he's going out of his mind excited, and he's like, "Are you pumped? Are you ready to get into a tree?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm not. I'm going to get into a blind with 2 9-year-olds for the first couple weekends. Like I'm in a different place, but it's so fun, man. Like." I have a weird schedule this year just because of the meat eater stuff. And like, I don't have the kind of schedule I've had for like 11 years. I don't have it this year. So I'm not in this big pressure cooker situation where I'm like, I got to kill $3 in September and take the pressure off. I'm kind of in a different place. And it really has allowed me just to look at the situation I'm bringing my little girls into and being like, all right, here's where we're going to hunt. Here's how we're setting up. Here's how we're scouting. And so I'm scouting for myself a little bit because I do have some trips coming up. Mm-hmm. But I'm really like my bandwidth is just going in that direction because I really want them both to get deer. And I think we're on the cusp. We don't have anything, just locked down, But the stuff I'm seeing and the spots that we're getting set up, I'm starting to, it's like by the day, I'm like, man, I think this is going to work. Like at least I think there's going to be deer within 20 yards of us. I don't know if they'll end up dead or scared. I don't know, but
right.
It's so fun.
It's interesting. Are they going out with you on some of these, like, scouting missions, like helping you go out in the woods and just kind of, whether it's traipsing around or, or if they're getting into the serious business, I know they're 9, right? So there's but so much they're going to get serious about an attention span and stuff like that. But are they getting out into the timber with you? And if so,
oh yeah,
how does that make you kind of look at things through a different lens whenever you're seeing how they react to things and as you're uncovering things and teaching them stuff?
Dude, it's fun, man. I mean, it makes me think about this process differently. I mean, it's the same thing. Maybe this is a poor comparison, but when you have a cameraman over your shoulder, that everything changes with a hunt. And to me, it becomes less fun. It becomes more fun when I take my girls and I don't have a weapon, but they're like a similar thing where you just have to consider, okay, how do we get away with 2 people and one who might not know what the hell they're doing, right?
Right.
And so you just like, okay, I can't make too many mistakes here. Like you can't, it's kind of like the public land version of bow hunting, right? Like you're not going to get away with a ton.
Yeah.
Like you could maybe get a little sloppy here and there once in a while, but overall, if it's not a pretty tight plan, you're going to fail. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, you look at your entrance routes, like how far can they walk and can we get there quietly? And then I'm using blinds with them because they're just so much more comfortable in that situation. And so then it's like, is that sucker brushed in right? And is the wind going to be perfect? And where's the approach going to be? And it just makes you kind of analyze it in a different way. You sort of like, maybe this sounds cocky, but you kind of take it for granted when you just like own yourself, right? Like you're only accountable for your own hunting and scouting. You just feel like, okay, I kind of got this, like, and if I screw up, whatever, I can live with that because I've done it a billion times. This makes you think about it. Just there's layers to it that don't come in when you're by yourself.
Right. And you have to be that much more on top of it because to your point, if you're by yourself, and you're this way, I'm this way. A lot of the guys that we know are this way. I walk into a place. I try not to screw it up, right? But there's times where I walk in and I screw it up for whatever reason, whether it's like all of a sudden like my wind switched or something happened and like the deer were where I didn't think they were going to be in this area I was going to walk through, and then they were there when I got there, and so you just kind of stop, look at the map, reassess, and go, all right, where am I going next? When you got 2 little girls with you, walking that extra mile and a half through the timber around a swamp through a cedar thicket really isn't in the cards, right? So You screw up the spot with the blind, day's done. It really at that point, right? So it's really kind of a high stakes, maybe in some ways more high stakes than it is whenever you're hunting by yourself.
Oh, it's way harder. I mean, in some ways it's way easier because you only give yourself X amount of options. Like when you walk out there, you could go set up on the ground if this spot doesn't work, or you could go saddle up over here. You're going to make something happen, plan A through Z, whatever. With them, you're like, okay, we got 4 blinds up. This one's good for this one. This one's good for this wind, whatever. And you can't really call those audibles and, go sit on, put your back to a tree with them because that's going to fall apart. Yeah. And so you just kind of go, okay, like the work we do ahead of time, there's more weight to that than those in the moment decisions. Like when you and I just walk out there. Yeah. And so I freaking love it. Like it's making me it's kind of giving me a fresh perspective. It's the same thing, taking them fishing or anything like that. Like you just got to think, how can I make this super fun and super successful? Yeah. And that's not so easy to do when you're dealing with wild critters and weather, but goddamn, it's fun, man.
Yeah, man, for sure. I remember my little girl she's not too much into the hunting thing anymore. She likes to fish. But I remember whenever I first started taking her out, and it was just like, I remember when she first heard her first gobble, and it was like her eyes got like this big, and she just like looked at me. She was like, "What was that?" And I was like, "That was a turkey." It was like, it was the first time she'd ever heard it, And so I remember that look on her face, and I was just like, that is super cool. I was like, if I don't get to do anything else hunting related with you, like that was it. I wrote a whole article on it at one point for when it was called QDMA, about, taking her out on her first hunt and stuff like that, man. So I hope you guys shoot some deer in the face.
I hope we don't shoot him in the face.
Right. Make for a pretty shitty mount.
Yeah. I hope we shoot him in the chest.
Right. Yeah.
Specifically in the non-shoulder region of the chest.
Right. Exactly. But so let's turn the page here to, what you're kind of working on yourself, like where you're at. Are you getting some glassing in? I gotta admit to you, I was listening to your Foundations podcast. And for those out there listening that don't know,
Tony hosts a Foundations podcast on Wired to Hunt. It's killer, chock full of information. If you've not checked it out yet, you definitely need to. I was listening to the glassing one. And it reminded me that I had talked about going and glassing that one cut during the summer, either from the saddle or from the truck or whatever. And it was the motivation for me to go, all right, man, I need to make a trip in like the next 2 weeks to go do that. Cause I've done the drive around my local area looking for, the crop rotation, like if there's crops nearby, even if it's, a mile away or whatever, I'm still kind of looking at it just to kind of know where the draws are at and stuff like that. Yep. And last year I had a few that were beans and I could glass. And this year it seems like normal rotation, 1 year beans, next year corn. Seems like I'm on the corn year for a lot of that stuff. So a lot of my glassing opportunities around here are really kind of shot. So I think I'm going to be heading to the mountains and do the cut glassing because I got to pay that off. Because I remember we were talking about it and you were like, man, that's a great idea. And I was like, yeah, I probably need to go do that now. So how's your glassing going? I mean, you getting any good inventory?
Yeah. I got a few deer I've seen in Minnesota and Wisconsin so far that make me super interested in where they're going to be in a couple of weeks. One of them is just a freaking stud over where I'm going to take my little girls. And he's kind of a homebody. I think I ran into him last year. I'm not sure, but he's probably 140-ish, low 140s. Just for up there, like he's an awesome
tank
deer.
Of a deer. Yeah.
I saw him with one of my daughters when we were over there scouting a couple weeks ago, and I've got some cameras out, and he's like semi-consistent. I know there's some bear baiting going on around there, which could throw the whole thing it could screw me up pretty bad if there's people going in there with 4-wheelers and stuff. But so far he seems to be sticking around. And so I'm curious about that buck just because I think there's like a real outside chance I could put one of my daughters on him early.
Oh, that'd be
and
killer.
Then I've got I found some stuff in southwestern Wisconsin that's got some. I've seen a lot of big bucks this year. It's been for the effort that I've put in, I've got nothing to complain about. Let me put it that way. And part of that is like you said, I'm just in some of the places I hunt, I have the conditions that are working for me. I've got the bean fields and the alfalfa and some of the more open stuff over there in Wisconsin. That just some years you have it, some years you don't. Yeah. Some spots really provide that opportunity and some don't. And, it's interesting, like writing those foundation scripts, you just realize how much you can put into something like that. You talk about just long range glassing, right? And we talk about just like, well, you'd think about you could pull your truck up on top of a knoll or in a field drive and mount your spotting scope to your window or whatever and not really do much work. But when you talk to people who are, hunting pressured deer, they're always like, yeah, I'm camoing up and I'm hiking in because there's this back corner or this spot that, the spot of the field that kind of falls off. That's where they always are. And I'm trying to figure out, what wind's blowing when they come out there. And there can be like a really fun strategy to it. It's like kind of a mini hunt in and of itself. And it's a freaking blast, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing that I think that you mentioned there that people sometimes lose sight of is, yeah, you want to get out there and you want to find these deer. And I love glassing up big deer, whenever the opportunity presents. But there's also that fine line of like, are you going to do more damage than you are good potentially, depending, right? Because you still kind of, depending on how close you're going to get, right? If you're in an area that you've got hundreds of yards and you're doing it from like a roadside or whatever, and you're just sitting in your truck, and it's, probably no harm, no foul. But if it's a place like on a piece of public like this, like this cut, I still would have to be mindful of like, all right, well, what's my wind doing? Where are the deer going to come from and stuff like that? Because I could end up going in there and screwing it up before I ever have a chance to kind of get in there and figure it out. And I got some cell cameras in the general area where I've got some good intel where I know that there's some good prospects in the area, whether they remain there once fall rolls around or not, still remains to be seen. But the last thing I would want to do is go in and screw it up for a cheap thrill, so to speak,
Well, I mean, that's a consideration, right? Like, I mean, I think we use that as an excuse sometimes. Like, I'm not saying it's not a legitimate excuse. I'm just saying every situation is different. So there are, you might have a situation where it's absolutely right to stay out because you just can't, like when you go in, you're going to go in to kill, leave them alone. But I've had situations where, I think I wrote about this. I shot a buck years ago in north central Minnesota. I had permission to hunt this little private property, and there was a hay field. and you could sneak in and glass it, but the deer would come out and then they'd start filtering your way. And eventually they were going to go past you to the neighbor's field. And so you just had to leave when it was like prime time, or they'd get past you and you were screwed and you'd blow them up. And I learned that the hard way. And so, that situation, you'd kind of look at that and go, well, I probably shouldn't go in there. But I went in there and watched those deer a lot. And I killed a great buck, like, I don't know, 5 days into the season or something, cutting through there. And even though I like, it killed me to have to leave. Like, wait, I don't know if you've ever fished tournaments or not, but like when you fish a bass tournament, like you pre-fish for it and you don't want to set the hook on anything, right? Or you don't want to set the hook on a ton of fish because you don't want to sore mouth them if you're going to catch them tomorrow in the tournament. And so it's like such an unnatural feeling. Like you flip a jig or something up there, you throw a frog up there and a fish eats it, and then you just wait till it spits it out. And you can feel it like swimming around and chomping on it. And you're like, every like ounce of your being is like, set the hook and cross his eyes. You can't do it. It's kind of like the same thing with that glassing situation where it was like, you just want to push it like another 10 minutes, like another 20 minutes, see who else is going to come. But you got to get out. Or, like in your situation, if you look at it and go, I want to go up there and watch bad. I want to see who's walking through that cut. But if your spidey senses say no way, don't do it, man.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
It's hard, man, because the reason I would go do it if I could get a decent vantage point and do it from my truck, I would do it. And I'm going to go up there in the next 2 weeks because I've got some cameras and stuff that I've got to check. And it's going to really probably be a game time decision because I'm really apprehensive to walk up through and kind of get a better vantage point up kind of in the cut because I have to walk up, right? And I'd be going in the afternoon. So my thermals are all rising, right? So anything that's going to be up there in that general area just off the top of that cut is going to win me before they ever get a chance to come out. And so I'm a little apprehensive about it. And I got a lot of really good intel, like in general. Like I've got probably just in that general area of the cell camera that's there. I probably have, and I know like it's not capturing everything, and I have another camera in the general area that's just a regular one. But I've probably gotten like 2 shooters just on that one alone, and so I'm like, okay. And I can see directionally where they're coming from. I'm like, all right, I kind of got an idea, time stamping them, kind of know when they're coming through, have a rough idea where they might be bedded, and so I'm like, man, I don't know that I'm going to gain enough to risk screwing it up right now. Those deer may not even be there. And the one thing I wanted to ask you, man, it's like your experience in the big woods, like what percentage of bucks have you found are home bodies in the big woods versus deer that are certainly going to transition?
That's a good question.
I kind of have a number in my mind just from what I've seen where I think it's at, but I'm just curious to what you think.
I don't know. I think the safe answer for me would be like maybe 50%.
That's exactly where I was landed.
Man, and I
don't see as much transition in the big woods as I do in other places, on smaller pieces. That's been at least my experience. All the big woods that I've run cameras on and watched, I've typically had about 50% of the deer stick around. Yep. On some smaller parcels, whether it's suburban or whether it's like just smaller pieces of public in closer to like, I don't want to say super populated areas, but like outside of towns and stuff like that, where it's like, maybe it's 1,000 acres or maybe it's 500. It's like, I've had years where I lost every single deer that was on it in the summer,
Yeah, man, that's a hard one because we talk about this all the time, like the transition, like, oh, is that summer buck going to be there? And, just think how often you see like one buck, like one good one just cruising through, or you do get those pictures of a buck for like a week and then they're gone. Or, I think they're a hell of a lot harder to pin down than we think. And I just, we kind of like these neat compartments, right? Like, okay, his home range is this. And so he's in here somewhere. And it's like, man, he's an animal that can walk. So, and when you're talking in the big woods, you're talking about kind of this homogeneous freaking mono landscape that, if he might not have like a super compelling reason to stay somewhere, he's getting hounded.
Right.
So he, like this section might not offer vastly better nutrition or, spots to bed that give him all the advantages than the next section over. And if you start getting in there, and even if you don't know you bumped him or you don't know who's in there with you that bumped him, in that situation, I think they're like really good at going, all right, I'm 3 ridges over now, buddy. Like, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I've seen I feel kind of the same way. Cause I feel like in some of these places that where maybe only 50% transition, for example, it's not saying that they're not transitioning. What that's saying to me is that their fall range encompasses at least part of the summer range where I was capturing them, right? Because I don't know what their entire summer range is. You know what I mean? I might just be getting inventory of them in an area of it, and it might just so happen to overlap where their fall range is going to be. And so what I started thinking about with some of these big woods deer is that, especially if they're in an area where they're going to have kind of food and cover year round, especially the piece of big woods that I'm hunting in PA, where when the foliage drops, man, if you're not in like serious cover, like it is open, and so those pockets are going to be good all year, like where it's thick and it's got cover and it's got food. And I was starting to think about it, and I'm like, man, because I sent you some of the pictures of the deer that I have in this particular area, and it's like, for only getting to do a couple days of scouting in the winter and getting the inventory that I've gotten, I'm pretty excited about the prospects. And I'm like, crossing my fingers that I'm like, man, if 50% of them stick around, because they're in the best places that I found, and I'm like, man, the places adjacent to it just aren't nearly as good. So I don't know why they would leave necessarily. And the does are just as nomadic. And so if deer are just congregating there, then they're going to have does in their general area as well. And so I'm thinking about it going, well, what would be their incentive to move at that point?
So clear this up for me. That concentration of bucks that you've got there, you said you think that's tied to cover?
I think it's tied to cover and food. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's actually that spot specifically is the one little bit of topography that I found. Outside of like some sheer drops and stuff like that, like big ridges that once you get to the top, it's kind of flat. Like this was the one area where I found like a little bit of topography that was going to push deer around, which is why I put a camera where I put it, because I was like, well, this is the only spot I found that's clearly going to funnel and push deer in a direction.
Well, and it probably is a situation that offers them some advantages with the wind too, right?
Well, there's a bull on the back end. And so I've already kind of scoped out where I was planning to hunt, how I would access it. And I'm like, yeah, down in the bottom there, man, coming off the backside of that bull, I was like, it's going to get squirrely in there. I was like, so I guarantee you it's going to be hard to hunt. I'm going to have to hunt the not that it's the classic Dan Enfelt thing, but I'm going to have to hunt that backside of that bull probably 3/4 of the way up to try to keep my wind advantage a little bit. Because if I get down too low on that, I'm going to be screwed.
Yeah.
So
man, that two things with that. I really think, and I've said this a billion times, but I think those big woods bucks that's the hardest challenge out there. And it so closely mirrors elk hunting to me.
Yeah.
Like like concentration animals. Okay. Why are they here? And then you start ticking off the reasons, and it's like, okay, they got the food, and it's a little bit different than the food I found over there. And then they've got some kind of terrain working for them, and the wind is kicking my ass, and X, Y, Z, and it's so consistent like that. But yet you can still blow them out of there because they know where 10 places like that are, and we know one.
Exactly.
And you think about there when you hunt those deer like that, and then you talk about how tied to cover that is. Man, I had 2 moments like in the last year that were just an awakening for me. Hunting down in Iowa on that public land when it went from the first weekend of the season, which was October 1, to the middle weekend of October. So 2 weeks later, just how much more open it got when I went back down there and I killed my buck and where they were. And so just seeing, like, even in a place with a big concentration of deer, food everywhere, the most beautiful deciduous forest you can imagine, lots of bluffy stuff that offers them all kinds of things they need. There were still buck concentrations, and they were always tied to the next level of cover.
Yeah.
And you see that so often.
Yeah. It's, this spot's going to be really interesting to hunt. I mean, right now it's chocked full of food. Like there's plenty of browse like year round. Cause when I scouted it in the winter/spring, there was tons of browse in there, and there was still fresh deer sign in there. It was one of the few places I found a concentration of deer sign. And now there's like wild blueberries and raspberries and just like all kinds of stuff. So not any surprise, I'm also seeing a fair amount of bears in there too. Yep. So now I'm like, all right, it's PA, it's black bear, but there's a lot of them. I'm like, all right, I got to have a little bit of heat with me or something just for the dark walk in and the dark walk out. But I'm pretty stoked on it. It's really thick, a little bit of topography, and it's also in between 2 swamps that connect. And so it's kind of like, it kind of has everything coming together, like a little bit of topo, cover, some food, and then some soft edge for them to kind of follow and kind of meander around as well, which doesn't suck. And it's the easy access. If anyone were to hunt it, is how I walked in to scout it. But I found another way that I can kind of get in that actually would be on the opposite side, to where anyone who's going to try to go in and hunt that, as they push in, they're going to push deer toward me, essentially. Yep. So it's going back to what you and I have talked about in the past, is that playing that 3D chess. It's like, where are the deer, where are the people, and then where do I need to be? Where are the deer ultimately going to end up? So
fun.
Yeah.
So fun, man.
Yeah. But anyway, kind of hard transitioning here, man, because I know, one of the things that we talk about, when we get together is, sometimes doing a little bit of like a winging it approach to hunting, doing some freelance hunting, kind of walking in and learning new areas. And there was this really smart guy from Pennsylvania that I read that had a quote in this Meat Eater article. He runs a really shitty podcast, by the way. You wrote an article for Meat Eater about, learning, elevating your hunting by kind of learning, different land and different terrain, and kind of always, being on that path to learning. And just for everyone out there listening, this kind of kicked off a text exchange between Tony and I, just kind of thinking about that. And at that time, I was actually doing research for not a work related project, but it was kind of work related. And I was digging into stuff around Alzheimer's. And I started kind of thinking about Alzheimer's in the context of like how you learn and how you try to kind of create neuroplasticity with people who have cognitive, who are experiencing cognitive decay, essentially. And started thinking about that in the context of deer hunting, because, well, why wouldn't I? And, and what it made me realize was, a lot of what we do in terms of trying to be successful as a deer hunter and kind of learning new lands and, and trying to figure out what deer are going to do and playing that chess match that we were just talking about, ties back to neuroplasticity. Like, how pliable is your mind to adjust, adapt, and kind of take in new information and create new connections that you didn't have before. And that's really, what the article that you wrote is about, is how do you do that, right? And then you and I decided to take it one level further and say, well, what is like the scientific kind of background and reason for it? And that's where I kind of landed. And you sent me this great video today of a guy trying to learn to ride a bike, where the welders welded it to where when he turned the handles right, the bike went left, and vice versa. And it took him 8 months to learn how to ride that bike. And even when he did that, he still wasn't great at it, And so it's this whole idea of, being open to kind of re-examining how you do things and what you do things and make new connections. And I just find that really, really interesting. And that you just asking me, to participate in that article made me think about my hunting in a different way. Just that one question made me think about like, how and why am I getting better, and how do I continue to do that now that I'm aware of it?
Yeah. I mean, so let's talk about that neuroplasticity, because I think it is so important to deer hunters. But let's back up a second on that, because that article, I can't remember what that was called, but it was something like the one way to become a better deer hunter, like the one guaranteed way. I can't remember what the clickbaity title they put on it for me was, but it was something about becoming a better deer hunter. And I'm really trying to lean into that. Like you mentioned earlier about that foundations episode I did on long range glassing. Like, I got to get out there. That's sort of the goal with a lot of the stuff I create, is to get you out there. Mm-hmm. Like, so we've kind of created in this hunting industry, like, I'm going to give you the answer, you'll kill more deer. Mm-hmm. Like I own some kind of intellectual property you don't. And when I spill the beans, you guys are going to go out there and you're going to kill one. And the reality is that's just not true. Like, if that were the case, we just listened to, the outdoor channel celebrities and we'd all be killing 200 inchers. Like, we're not. Like, there's a reason. And so that kind of stuff, I love those kind of articles, because they get people to go, I'm going to go try this, or I'm going to try to be better, instead of I'm going to try to find this like loophole out in nature where the deer are dumb, or where I can call them in, or where I can do something that's like, it's demonstrably not going to work. Like, statistically, maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe statistically, it's just not going to work for you. But getting lots of experience in the woods will work for you. Yeah. Spending lots of time scouting and enjoying yourself and learning this process and owning it will make you better. Like, that's the route most of us have to take, because we can't write a giant check and kill old dumb deer. Like, we just can't.
Right.
And one of the things that goes along with that is like what you were talking about with the neuroplasticity. We are really creatures of habit in a lot of ways. And that video with the guy on the bike, that was the reason that it took him 8 months to learn how to ride that bike, which was just the opposite steering of a regular bike. Every regular bike you've ever ridden in your life was because he grew up riding a bike a certain way, and that groove was worn really deeply in his brain. And as an adult, that shit's hard to change. But as a kid, you can give that to an 8-year-old, and 3 weeks later, they can just ride it fine because the groove isn't worn as deep. And man, we do that with hunting all the time.
Yeah, there was one quote that he mentioned in there that I thought was just on point. And it's funny because it's not even deer related, but I think that that's the thing as deer hunters and just in general in life. It's like you need to learn to look outside of like your own personal biases and influences to kind of find the best ways to do things, right? Like that's the one thing whenever you work in any type of business, me working in like digital strategy, I work in a specific sector of digital strategy for a specific type of business. I'm all the time looking outside of what I do every day for new ways to do the same things that we've been doing, but a way to adapt it, right? And that's where the real value comes. Like the one quote he had was, knowledge does not equal understanding. And I thought, man, that is powerful because there are so many people when you listen to them talk, right? Or you read an article by them or whatever, maybe it's a hunting celebrity. It's like, man, they got a lot of knowledge, man. They can talk to you about scrapes and sitting on field edges and planting food plots and doing all this stuff. And all that stuff's wonderful, right? But when you put them out in the middle of nowhere without the ability to manipulate, they don't have the understanding, right? It's not applicable, right? It's like they get it academically, but the application aspect of it to show true understanding just isn't there. And the tie back I made to the whole Alzheimer's thing, I guess I should bring that full circle because people are probably like, what the hell is we talking about? So not to get too far into the weeds, but the way Alzheimer's kind of works, and I'm going to make this really generic because I was watching a TED Talk and there was this woman who was a doctor and she was giving a kind of a speech on, the importance around neuroplasticity related to Alzheimer's and cognitive kind of diseases. And there's these things called plaques and tangles essentially in Alzheimer's. And plaques do exactly what you kind of think they would do. They gum up the works. They get in between kind of neurotransmitters are going to fire and neural networks, and they kind of block it, right? Tangles do exactly what you think tangles would do. They wrap around the telephone wires, if you will, and eventually they get so tight they choke it out, right? And so the challenge with Alzheimer's is that if I know Tony Peterson as Tony Peterson the hunter, and it's the only way I know him, when the plaque or the tangles or both potentially intercept that neuro connection, I no longer know Tony because I only know him one way. But if I know Tony the hunter, I know Tony the father, I know Tony the good friend, I know Tony the writer, I know Tony. If I know him in 6 different ways, when that plaque or tangle kind of blocked that one way that I know him, maybe it blocks the hunter version, I still know Tony 5 other ways. And so I don't forget him. And that's kind of how I see deer hunting. It's like if I know how to hunt a transition in a swamp one way, and that's the only way I know how to hunt a transition, I have knowledge, but I don't really have understanding of the transition. But if I know how to hunt it, and I've hunted it before in a swamp, I've hunted it in the big woods, hardwood setting, I've hunted it in a pine setup, I've hunted it in deciduous forest setup, or whatever the case is, I now not only know how to hunt a transition, I've actually applied and understand how to actually execute the hunt. And that to me is like where the neuroplasticity comes in, is like, I want to know multiple ways of the same thing. That way, no matter when I see it, where I see it, I immediately will know and have an analog of how I should approach it because I know it from a multitude of angles, if that makes sense.
Totally. I mean, that was a really nerdy way to say, get lots of experience out there hunting different places and watching deer do their thing.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, it's just a database. But
it's a scientifically proven approach, right? That's kind of like the point of it, is that like, this approach to expanding your neural network, is scientifically proven in a bunch of different ways in therapy kind of settings, but it's still just your brain working at the end of the day, right? And if you think of it in that context, that's just my brain working and it's only going to do what I feed it, then you're more mindful of what you're feeding it and actually paying attention to the things you're taking in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think maybe this is totally wacky, but I think that our brains have like a very strong default mode where, especially if I kind of had this revelation this week. I was talking to I had to interview Andy May for something. And so we just got to BSing. And of course, he was just leaving the woods because he'd been out scouting. And then the next day, I guest hosted an episode of Wired to Hunt with Mark where we talked to Zach Fehrenbaugh. Mm-hmm. And so I got to talk to those two guys just back to back. And I was like, man, there's so many similarities between these guys and some of the just Eddie Claypool type big buck killers out there on public land. And it's so tied to this just thirst for new. And, you know, like like for Andy, for example, when I was talking to him, he was telling me about this place he was scouting, his public land in Michigan. And I was like, well, how are the prospects? And he's like, well, I won't kill one here this year. I'm just trying to learn it. Just, you know, like he wasn't going in there like this is guerrilla warfare. He's like, I'm just, you know, this place interests me. I'm walking through it in a rainstorm and I'm going to learn this, and it's not going to pay off this year, but it's going to pay off long term. And he's just expanding that and keeping keeping things fresh and going, okay, like here's some new inputs, here's some new learning. And it doesn't allow him, he's not going to get into a rut. Like right. He's going to keep going, and it's not going to get stale, or he's not going to default to like, well, I guess I go to this stand because it's October 7th and 8 years ago I saw a nice one. You know what I mean? Like he's moving forward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that truthfully was whenever I started scouting that big woods here in PA. I mean, that was really the thinking. Like it was really like a 3-year plan. You know, I was like, this year, I wasn't even planning to hunt it this year. Truck hammer pool kind of changed my mind, where I was like, I got into deer more quickly than I had expected. And so, well, whatever, I'm going to hunt it. The real plan was to go scout it this year, maybe not even hunt it unless I had no prospects around here, maybe bad weather around here, and take a trip there and hunt the bad weather and just see what I find, you know, to continue to learn it. But I think what you're getting at, you know, to a degree, and it's the same thing whenever you're doing research or whatever it is, there's always an element of confirmation bias. Like you're always seeking people, and it's not a fault of anybody's. Everybody does it. Some just recognize when it's happening and kind of course correct. And they still, even when they recognize it's happening, it still kind of creeps in. And you have this idea of confirmation bias where you're really working to confirm the things you already believe or already think that should happen, right? And that's why that person will sit in that stand in public land for 20 years and be on the forums saying that there aren't any more deer in Pennsylvania on public land, right? Because they sat a clear cut 20 years ago. It's 20 years old now. There aren't any deer that live in it anymore. So that means, therefore, the entire 200,000 acres outside of the spot that they're at has no deer. You know, yep. It's that idea that they're devout in that spot. They're trying to confirm their bias that spot is still good, as opposed to just saying, you know what, I need to step back, take a 30,000 foot view of what's going on here, and open my mind to other possibilities, and just seek knowledge, seek information.
Yeah. Well, and that's that confirmation bias that you're talking about. I mean, we all do that, right?
Oh,
like we
100%,
do it,
yeah,
3,000 times a day. But when you look at, like, Kenyon and I get into a lot of lively discussions, because Kenyon, he's really like, if you would take something that's like a standard set belief in the industry, like the lull is real and this is what it does. He's a guy who's going to be like, yes, here's why, here's the studies, whatever. And I always look at that stuff and I go, how does that apply to me? Like, first off, if I'm hunting public land, I'm more concerned about pressure than anything else.
Yeah.
And if I can go hunt, and I can see this in different states where it's actually pretty good in the beginning of October. And I can only speculate that that's because there's fewer people out there, because they're buying into this and they're at home watching football and they're waiting for the rut. Like, okay, that there might be truth to that in your specific situation, but it might not mean anything to me.
Right.
And like, you have to learn that shit for yourself, I think. And there's no way around that. And when you get into that mode where you're like, well, it must be this way because I've hunted this for 20 years. And there's, you know, like Zach brought that up. You know, people tell him all the time, like, well, you can't come to my state and sneak around and kill one. And he's like, I don't know. I just go to these states and I sneak around and kill one. Like, everybody tells me I can't do it, and I keep doing it. And I'm like, yeah, they're sitting there with that bias, and they're just going, there's no way, because they either can't or they won't.
Right.
And it's working against you. And I think the clearest example of this is like, how often, I won't say even necessarily like how often do you kill mature bucks, but like how often do you encounter in any given season deer that would make you really happy? Because it takes, it takes an X amount of encounters to to kill one, and some seasons you get really lucky. And when you see them, they come in and you shoot them. And some years you see them and they don't, but that's a big win, especially when you're hunting public land.
Yeah.
And I always look at that and I go, okay, well, if you haven't seen a good one in 7 years, what's going on? They're there somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing too, is that people need to, especially if they're a normal working Joe, right? Like you got to kind of recalibrate what success looks like for you to a degree, right? I struggle with this for a while. It's like I have a pretty flexible job and I can get out a fair amount, probably more than like the average person who works like a normal career 9 to 5 or whatever. But even still, it's like I know personally that I'm not in the woods often enough during archery season to kill the type of buck that I want to kill every year. Like I just know that it takes a certain amount of days, right? Like there's not a specific amount, but it takes time, right? Time and opportunity, like, and you'll make it happen. I had to recalibrate what success looked like for me. And sometimes I'll get a little bit pissy about it, And I was talking to my brother-in-law this past week. He doesn't really hunt. He goes out, opening day gun season and happy to get a doe to put into the freezer or whatever. That's kind of his approach. And we were talking the other day and he was like, man, he's like, you always find a really good deer. And I'm like, yeah. I was like, but man, hard time killing them the past 2 years. You know what I mean? It's like, he's like, but yeah, man, he's like, but you should have filled all 3 tags last year. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah. He's like, well, you hit one in the Missouri that you lost. He's like, which sucked. He's like, you passed one on the last day of Ohio that you should have killed, but you let walk, which I thought I was going back to Ohio. COVID happened. I didn't get to go back. And then I screwed the pooch on one of my shooters in Pennsylvania, like right before Thanksgiving. He's like, so you had 3 encounters with shooters all within 20 yards. He was like, dude, he was like, he was like, I don't know what you're complaining about. I was like, yeah, people have it a lot worse off than me. I was like, I'll admit that. I was like, but at the same time, I was like, having those 3 encounters like that and coming away empty handed still sucks, but I was like, I think getting back to what we were talking about, I think the reason why, to your point, if you're not finding and you're not seeing deer, you're not having the encounters, what it was telling me was that I'm moving further and further away from that confirmation bias because I had it at 3 different states, all different types of terrain and topography. And they weren't like planned hunts. They were more just like, all right, I'm going to go read the sign, see what's going on and figure out where I'm going to go.
Yep.
One was I made a move in Missouri to set up on basically some sign I'd seen the day before. The one in Ohio, I actually moved midday to a different area. And then the one in PA was I let sit for a while and just knew where there was I knew where there was a really good kind of primary scrape that had some really slick access that I used, and that was that. So yeah, man. I mean, I think we get caught up in the idea of like, I want it to happen here. I can envision it and that's how I want it.
Yep. Well, without question, we do that. But I also think like I've been kind of, I wrote an article recently for Meat Eater about why I love to shoot young bucks. Spencer really wanted me to write it. It freaking blew up, good and bad. It went both ways. It broke all over the place. But it made me think we have a weird thing going on where we talk about mature bucks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I know in my life, I hunt deer a lot. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I target mature bucks. It depends on the situation. But a lot of times I go hunt deer. And sometimes that leads me to big bucks. And what it made me realize is like, when we have a lot of people listening to us and a lot of people reading the things we write and they're like, they skip that learning to deer hunt stage and they're kind of in this like, well, okay, I'm going to target mature bucks. Like I'm going to target mature bucks on public land. Like, man, could you go kill a forky consistently on public land? Like, could you really, instead of just like saying it, or like a mature doe, like if you have an antlerless tag, how long, like just give me an estimate. How long do you think it'd take you to fill? Because there's a lot of reality baked into those scenarios sometimes. And I don't think there's any way around this if you're hunting pressure deer to learn deer first and bucks second. Yeah. And I think I think we kind of have missed that message a lot of times. And you get reminded of it when you start traveling, because when you start traveling, like, yeah, okay, I'm going here, you start looking for buck sign and stuff. But what you're doing, you're not throwing away the forky sighting and you're not throwing away the does that walk through. You're kind of like, I'll take it all because I need as much as you can give me here in this 4 days or week. And that stuff matters. And I think sometimes when we're at home or we're in a comfortable situation, it's like that little 6-pointer doesn't matter. And it's like, man, he might matter so much by just how he goes down the ridge and cuts down, or how did he approach the water like that. Because it was him today doesn't mean it isn't 140 incher tomorrow.
Right.
And, like if you're kind of just dismissive of that stuff, you're maybe not taking your game the right way.
Yeah, man. I mean, good God, you hit something, you hit the nail on the head so hardcore for me right now. Something that I've been just kind of, not saying I'm working through it, but then I'm recognizing, and it sometimes takes friends to help you recognize things. Going back to like the neuroplasticity thing, right? Seeking information from a lot of places. For folks that listen to this podcast, know my buddy Greg Litzinger. You may know him. He did the Meat Eater, the book of terrible shit that happens. What was the audio book that came out?
Like, the Campfire Stories.
Yeah. Yeah, my title probably isn't as good as the Campfire Stories. That was not a great title, but he's a good buddy of mine, lives close, and we talk a lot. And he's a guy that, one of those dudes that I turn to a lot for info, because Greg's just a hell of a hunter. He's good, and it's always been in pressured areas. And we talk a little bit about that often on the podcast, and often just in text and phone conversations, about that idea of just hunting deer, because he makes fun of me to a degree, because he's like, dude, you will go out of state. He's like, and in 3 days, like, you'll text me with like an encounter, or you missed one, or you hit one and it got, like, he's like, it's just uncanny. You go somewhere and it just like, it happens. He was like, and in Pennsylvania, he's like, you get so caught up in trying to dissect it and thread the needle so finely. He's like, that you're just not as effective. And his thing was, he's like, you're hunting deer when you go out of state. He's like, I've heard you say it. He's like, where you'll just take off and walk until you start to kick deer up. And then when you find deer, now you start hunting. He's like, we're in Pennsylvania. He was like, you already know where deer are at. He's like, and you've already kind of have an idea of where you want to kill them. He's like, as opposed to just killing the deer where he wants to be killed, And so it's like, he's like, that aggressiveness you use out of state, you need to use that at home. He's like, because I think you're going to be better off. And it goes back to that neuroplasticity, right? It's like, I'm taking that in, thinking about it, and thinking of like going through examples. We were talking before we started recording, like, where have I screwed up? Right. And going back and examining old hunts and going like, well, how did I screw this up? How did I screw this up? And like, how can I fix it? What was the learning opportunity that I didn't see then because I was too caught up in the emotion or the moment or whatever? Now I can look at it and go, well, this is where it went wrong, and this is how I fix it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, hunting on memories is bad, man. I mean, it's good and bad. It depends how you use it. But that situation is really common. Like where people can get it done on the road and they struggle at home. That's happened to me so many years where I just go, well, they've come through here. They love this little funnel, or they love this pinch point. And it's so easy to just be like, I'm going to go there because I killed one there 7 years ago. Or, I got all those trail camera pictures in there, and you're not hunting in the moment. And, I mean, we have weird messaging because we preach the scouting thing so much, because it is so important to like learn the land and just be out there. But you can almost throw away like half of what you learn the moment the season opens, and you might shave off another 2% every week. Or, for sure. Sometimes some of it comes back around, right? You're like, okay, that little island in the swamp that was rubbed up, that didn't matter to me at all in September, October, might be something now. So like some of it circles back around, but a lot of it is just, it was an excuse. Like it was sort of a thinly veiled excuse to go into the woods, and we're like, okay, I'm not going to go in the woods in March unless I have a real purpose, unless I have a mission. And that is to find those rubs and whatever. But really what you're doing is you're just taking in the woods. Like you're just learning what, and not that you're ignoring sign, like it's important, but you're just getting a lay of the land, and you're getting more comfortable out there. And you're just like building a little bit better map to work off of. Yeah.
And the way I've always kind of qualified that is, and I know you and I have debated the whole, bed hunting versus not bed hunting and stuff like that. And, and two guys come to mind to me, and that's Enfault, right? Cause, I've known him for a little while, super good dude. And then Andy, I've been able to have him on the show and talk to him a handful of times. And they have a similar style, because he's, what I would refer to as a beast disciple, right? Like that's, he very much so has got a lot from the beast and Dan and that approach. But it can be a very daunting kind of way of hunting. And I'm tying this back to neuroplasticity because people think of beast hunting as a super ultra like aggressive style hunting or whatever it is, whether it's Zach or Andy or whomever. But really, and it can be, to some people, it's intimidating, especially younger people or maybe people who are newer to hunting, or maybe they've been bow hunting for a while, but they're trying to get more into that mobile style of hunting. The way I always kind of qualify it is that, yeah, it is aggressive, but it's really just a framework. That's really all beast style hunting is. And Dan and I have talked about that to where I'm like, Dan really and truly, yes, he's aggressive and he will make aggressive moves, but he is really just beast hunting at its core is having some really kind of known areas of where deer want to bed and then letting the woods come to you. Dan doesn't necessarily set up over a bed all the time. He may hunt a general bedding area where deer like to bed, and it might be a couple acres, And then there's other people like my buddy Greg Litzinger, like where he will literally hunt 50 yards from a known bed, and he won't hunt an area unless he's that on top of a bed. That's just kind of his style. But that style of hunting is really a neural framework as to how you evaluate things when you hit the woods and how you take it in. And that's really all it is. It's a framework for which you will adapt. It's just like a map. You use a map. It doesn't mean you're going to follow this exact course. There's likely going to be things that happen along the way. You just have other roads that you can happen to get off, other exits to get to the same place you need to ultimately get to. You just might have to go a different way. And that's really, to me, what that mobile hunting kind of is it's a framework, neural network for deer hunting, essentially.
Yep. Well, and the thing about, Dan's strategy and some of these other guys hunting beds, it's like, it's easy. It's sort of an easy sell as far as the concept. Like if you find this, this great big bed, it sounds, but what you don't get is all the input that like true big buck killers have, like you could have Dan Infold explain that to you a billion times. You wouldn't see the same things he sees when he walks into the woods.
100%.
And what it is, like you're talking about, is they kind of have the strategy built around it. It's like a very important input, right? Like if I know where that is, then now I can check that off. And I'm like, okay, what are the conditions? What's the seasonal timing? How can I get there? They're factoring in a whole bunch of different stuff so it's not just like I found his bed, now it's over. Like there's, I always think about that, those kind of strategies. Like when you work with a really good dog trainer, like they can tell you how to get a dog to heel or do a double blind retrieve or whatever. But when you watch them work with a dog, they're operating on a level that they can't explain to you because they've seen dog. They can like see the future with dogs. It's uncanny.
Yeah.
That's the same, like that level of understanding is what your buddy's doing and what Dan's doing, where it's not just finding a bed. Like it's the easy sell is to say, find the bed. The hard part is like, now here's how you hunt it. And like, I always joke, cause I'm like, this is not my thing. And I love finding them, but like those guys are operating on a level with bed hunting that I'm just like, it's like alien to me.
Yeah. I'm the same way. Like going back to like the whole neural idea, I love going to scout with different people, like Greg and I will get together and scout, usually like once or twice a year, and he'll find beds on areas that I've hunted and never found a bed. Funniest part was we were scouting one day and I'm like, man, I was like, he found a bed and we're walking along. I'm like, man, I never find beds. He's like, hey, you're standing in one. Like I was literally standing in a bed, in a buck bed, and it wasn't super, super obvious. Right. But he just, to your point, I like to just follow him around the woods and just watch what he looks at and what he looks for, because he looks for things different than I do. He sees things differently than I do. And it's that whole idea of, I don't know, man, like I've always found the people who I've thought and have seen as being the most, I don't want to say successful, or maybe most impactful or effective might be the right word to say, that they have an ability to be somewhat not selfless, but super aware of themselves and what they need to get better and have no ego about trying to acquire it, and, for me, when I go out into the woods and I'm scouting with, whether it's Greg or if it's my buddy Chad or with Aaron or whatever, I don't care who it is and how long they've been doing it. I'm watching them, trying to figure out like, what are they looking for in the same area that I'm looking? And I'll ask them like, hey man, what are you looking for here? just point blank, because I want to understand like how they're seeing things. You know, some people can explain it to you better than others. You know, Greg's actually really good at explaining it, and so it's like I've picked up a ton of stuff from him. But to me, like that's part of it, man. Like you want to up your game, go to different areas. You want to level it up even further. Take a buddy with you that you look up to as a deer hunter, and regardless, maybe they're better or maybe not as experienced as you. Because Greg and I walk away and he'll be like, "Hey man, when you found this over there, like that was really interesting." You know, like he'll pick up little things from me. And where I kind of learned that, I learned that probably later in life, was talking to Andre DeQuisto. I was at a convention at one point. He and I were talking. He barely knew me. I knew Cody, you know, and Cody and I had done some podcasts together and hung out. It was the first time I met Andre, and we were just kind of shooting the shit. And he was talking to me about a buck or whatever, and he asked me how my season was, and I was telling him about a couple hunts I had. And this dude has killed giants, started a tree stand company that's probably was like, you know, very innovative in the space for mobile hunting just in general, and his approach to hunting. And the dude was you can tell when someone's listening to you. And I'm sitting there talking to this guy, has no reason to listen to a word that I have to say, and literally like staring a hole through me, paying attention to every detail that I was telling him about the hunt. Then I don't even remember what questions he asked me, but he asked me like 3 very specific questions about the hunt. And he was like, in that moment, I was like, that's why that guy kills giant deer. Yeah. Like he was finding little nuggets from a guy who has half the experience that he has, you know, and a tenth of the talent, you know, and he's going, this guy has something that I can pick up from. And he's always looking for the nugget. And that's what I found, whether it's him, whether it's Dan, whether it's Don Higgins, whatever guy it is that has had success at a high level and killed a lot of big deer, they will listen to every single person when it comes to talking deer hunting, because they're always looking for that next little nugget that they didn't know of.
Yeah, dude, I had like a couple weeks span where Andy May kept texting me about that buck I killed in Iowa last year. Mm-hmm. And the questions he would ask me, by the end of it, I was like, dude, I think you've thought about this deer more than I have. Like, but it was like that. Like, okay, so when he was living by that river, but like where, like what kind of cover was it? Like, how close were you to the bluff? And like really specific shit. And it, you know, it wasn't like some dude trying to get my spot. He was trying to understand it. Mm-hmm. And you know, he went down to Iowa last year and killed a monster. Like, he doesn't need to talk to me about the buck I killed, but he was just like, that's just the drive. You know, I mean, mm-hmm. It's wild to see. It's so cool.
Yeah. It's funny because I almost qualify my ability to level up if whenever someone's kind of talking to me about that, if I'm thinking through their hunt as they're telling me it, when I start to ask questions like that, that's when I know I'm like, okay, I can now, like, I don't even need to be there anymore. I can now see the hunt kind of come together, and I'm not there, but every now and then it's like, I'll have like a couple like probing questions with Greg when he tells me about a hunt or whatever, where I'm going, you know, well, hey, what was that little bluff like? You know, or what were they eating? You know, what was the browse like? You know, just little things like that people don't think about. It's like, that stuff is just critical, man.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's really beneficial to get around people who are either better than you or just operate differently than you. Yeah. I mean, and that's, you know, when you talk about, you know, Greg and Dan and a bed strategy, you're talking about people who have mastered a certain kind of hunting, but also like kind of like Zach has, like they really have leaned into something they're confident. They've developed something that freaking works. And there's those bucks they're killing. There's other ways to kill them, mm-hmm. but like they're going, you know, like I talk to Zach about this a lot. Like, man, he has an unconventional strategy and it freaking works. And part of the reason it works is because he doesn't like sitting in trees waiting for him. Mm-hmm. Like he's wired to go to them, and he just freaking leans into that. And it's dry conditions, wet conditions, New York State, Ohio, Nebraska. It doesn't matter. He's going to find a way to work his style. And I think like the benefit to hearing from Greg or some of these other people is like, you can try that. Like you can go out and scout beds and start hunting them somewhere. It might work for you. You might totally flame out, you know, but like you could try it. And if it starts working for you, you start getting some success in some of these ways, like, man, you can develop that.
Yeah. And I think too, that especially, you know, folks out there that are maybe younger or newer to hunting, I actually think that they have a distinct advantage when it comes to kind of picking this stuff up, because just going back to the dude with the bike and the little kid, Took him 8 months to figure it out because, like you said, man, that rut was worn deep on how to ride a bike, right? Like that algorithm for how I'm going to ride a bike, like he was not breaking it, you know? That little kid just learned how to ride a bike like a couple weeks before that or whatever it was. Man, it took him 3 weeks to figure out how to ride a bike the opposite way. You know, just like the rut wasn't worn quite deep. And there's a distinct advantage for new hunters and even more so younger hunters to be able to kind of apply this approach and just, we always say be a sponge, but it's a real thing, right? As long as you put yourself around the right people and open up your mind to all the possibilities and try all these things, even if you fail and you flame out, man, you are going to figure stuff out that it will have taken you 20 years of reading articles, reading books, or whatever. If you just go out and you try it a handful of times, especially if you're young, because that will burn a path in your memory. You will now understand that approach. You'll learn quickly whether or not it's going to work for you or not. But for nothing else, it will now be in your database forever as a viable way to do X, to kill a doe or to kill a mature buck or to hunt from the ground or to hunt out of a saddle or to be aggressive and track one down or spot and stalk or whatever it is. It's like, man, you know, variety is the spice of life, man. You know, just go try it all.
And what you're doing there too is you're figuring out what you enjoy. Like what kind of hunting, you know, really blows the wind up your skirt and like what's really rewarding. And we've kind of been fed this lie that it's only kill big bucks that matters. Like as long as, you know, like as long as you're going out there and you're shooting big ones, that's everything. And that's not what this is about. Like I know I'm pretty close to a guy, I'm not going to say his name, but he was freaking filming hunting videos 35 years ago, probably. He's killed more different big game animals than probably almost any bow hunter out there. Super successful. He cannot wait to be done to go fishing and spearfishing because like he's been on tons and tons and tons of guided hunts in Africa 47 times and whatever. The hunting doesn't do it for him anymore, but it's his business. So he goes out and kills big shit on film and he doesn't enjoy it. And you could look at his life on paper and go, he must be the happiest person alive because he's doing, you know, every year his 3-story trophy room just gets more full of random critters from all over the world. But he would rather go spearfish in the Gulf Coast of Florida and have some fun. Right. And like we have this weird thing going on where it's like, you got to find like what is it really rewarding for you? And it's not going to be the easy stuff that you think. Like it's not going to be the easy, you know, 150-inch kill. It's going to be that process. Like it's going to be like you're going to feel like you're putting in some work and you're going to sweat and you're going to get stung by bees and you're going to do a lot of stuff that kind of sucks in the moment, but cumulatively adds up to something that means something to you. And that's like a hard message to get across because we want that instant gratification, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look, there's nothing wrong if someone wants to kill just big deer. There are some people that makes them happy as a pig and shit, you know, and they want to target a specific animal, right? Like I get that, you know what I mean? Like I've only ever done that once. And you and I've talked about that. It's like, it made me miserable, like to target one deer because the opportunity came and it went and that was it. You know, I had one crack at him and then someone else killed him. And it was just like, I spent 2 years watching that deer and had one encounter with him. I had a couple encounters with him, but one close enough to kill him and just couldn't make it happen. And then he was dead. You know, and so I kind of vowed at that moment that like, all right, if I find a good deer and I want to try to kill that deer. But if another good deer comes through before I see that deer, then I'm going to shoot the other deer. You know what I mean? It's like, this is all there is to it. You know, it's like, I want to kill a good deer, something that gets me excited. And that changes every day. You know what I mean? Like one day it might be one type set of standards. The next day it might be something else. But going back to that idea of, you know, just kind of exploring and stuff like that, you know, was talking about this at one point, you know, on one of the shows where, you know, if you don't like to sit in a tree all day, get down and move, man. Like don't let the conventional wisdom of like, it's the rut, so I have to sit here between 11 and 2. You know what I mean? Like if that doesn't make you happy, then get down. Right. And I was talking, I think it might even be Greg and I were talking about it, oddly enough. And we were actually talking about Zach. I was like, because we were talking about me hunting out of state, it's like I'm aggressive and I move a lot. And I was like, and I guarantee you I've gotten out of a tree, whether it was in Iowa, Ohio, Missouri, wherever, that when I got down 30 minutes later, a shooter walked by. I was like, I can promise you it happened. I was like, how many times do you think Zach or the guys from THP have moved because they're super aggressive and missed out on an opportunity on a really good buck because they moved? Yeah. But how many times have they killed a deer that made them really happy because they got down and they moved? Yep. You know, I was like, you can't play the what if game in the whitetail woods. You know what I mean? Yep. It's like, you got to just, if you want to move, you know, I'll always kind of set a time. When I get into a tree, I'll hop into my saddle and I get into a tree, and if I'll be like, all right, I'm going to give it a spot till 10:30. And if I don't see anything by 10:30, I've made the decision in my mind. I'm moving it and I'm moving on. There's no second guessing. I don't feel bad about it. When you don't set the plan for yourself to a degree in advance, I think that's when you start second guessing and you start to make some bad decisions. But like, I know at 10:30, the spot's dead to me. I'm off and I'm moving. You know what I mean? And that's all there is to it. Yep. And that's how I can kind of like almost be like a little bit machine-like in that way, to where I don't get into those emotions and feelings of like, man, should I stick around? Like, I think it might be, you know, maybe I just need to give it another half hour. You know, it's like, you can do that all day long, you know, but I'm more interested in what's over the next ridge. And then going back to what we've been talking about, what am I going to learn in the next 2 hours while I'm walking? Like, that's invaluable. You know, there might be a deer that comes through that I kill. I would say the odds are probably good that it won't happen, just deer hunting in general, right? But the odds of me learning something in the next 2 hours while I'm hiking, almost 100%.
Yep. Well, that's, you bring up a really good point there about, you know, not getting married to a spot, but being honest about like, okay, what does this do for me? Like, what are the odds here? And I get asked that a lot. Like, how long do you give a spot? Or like, you find, you know, an area just banging sign on public land. How long? And my stock answer is usually one evening, one morning, and I'm gone. That's, you know, and of course it depends on what it is, but, and what you see, you know, you might see something but just generally it's like not long, you know, compared to what you could. And I think that that's partially a kind of a public land mentality. And, you know, Greg and Zach and these guys, like Andy, like you've mentioned multiple times, they're aggressive. They're aggressive for deer hunters, but for public land, they're just doing what it takes to get it done. And that's one of the like secret intangibles of when you go somewhere and you got 5 days in Oklahoma to kill one, you can't afford to not be aggressive, right? You got to you got to figure something out. You got to get on them. You got to hunt them. And if it's not happening, you got to get on somebody else. And you can't just be like, okay, on X, this looked great, so I'm going to ride out 5 days here. Most of the time, you know, like once in a while you'll find a situation where you have a ton of faith. But when you hunt private land and you're like, oh, I put in this food plot and I did this, or, you know, like I have this stand and it's usually pretty good the end of October, it's sort of easy to be complacent and be overly cautious and not go that aggressive route. And yeah, like you said, you know, you're going to make mistakes when you get aggressive, but you're going to learn more. And, you know, and if you go, you know, if you travel somewhere and you sit a new tree every single day for a week, you learned a lot because there's a reason you sat there. Like you didn't just, whether it was observation or you walked in, you went, holy balls, this is covered in sign. I gotta see what's going on. Right. You didn't pick it because it was bad. You picked it because you had some faith. And if you didn't have faith, you wouldn't have sat there. You know, like there's like very little settling. I won't say there isn't any, because sometimes you get caught.
Well, sometimes it's getting ready to get dark or whatever. You've been scouting all freaking day and you got like an hour of daylight left. And then it becomes, you know, well, is there value in me walking for another hour, not finding shit? Or should I just get into a tree and see what happens? You know what I mean? Like there's that type of stuff that happens. But what you had mentioned just a couple seconds ago is it's that, man, it always comes back to this. It's asking that question, why? Like you should be asking, like when these guys, myself, you, whomever is being quote unquote aggressive, we're making decisions. Like we're looking at a map of thinking about where am I going next and why should I be going there? You know, it's not just throwing a dart at a dartboard. It's like there's some rationale behind why you're making that move. And so, you know, regardless of whether you're going to ride something out or whether you're going to move, the question of why should always be in play, right? At every turn, it should be, I found a rub. Why is that there? Why would it be there? What's the map look like? What's the terrain features look like? How would you use these terrain features? All right, I don't think I'm going to sit here. I don't think there's enough pieces of the puzzle here for me to spend a sit. Let me move on. Where should I go next? Why would I go there? Because of this. Okay, now I go, right? I heard someone say this one time, and I started using it, and it made a big difference for me. When I decide to sit somewhere, I usually try to have at least 3 reasons why I should be there. You know what I mean? Like and they don't always have to be the same whys, but
Yep.
like 3 different reasons why I should set up in a spot, or why I should hunt this particular area, where it's like the wind's almost wrong for me and right for the deer. I have really good access coming in, and it's on an acorn flat and it's early October. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, 3 reasons. I want 3 points of connection for me to go hunt a spot. And once I started doing that, I started having, not surprisingly, better encounters and better hunts, because I wasn't just saying my access is good, I'm going to hunt here, or my wind is good, I'm going to hunt here. It's like there was legitimate 3 reasons why I needed to be there. And if I didn't have at least 3, it wasn't worth hunting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that you see people who are pretty seasoned. They kind of instinctively do that, whether they're like conscious of it or not. It's like the difference between, okay, here's a river crossing. This is great. But here's a fence crossing right beyond the river crossing. And here's the best tree, 20 yards downwind that my wind's going to blow over. Like you just go to those. Like, it's not good. Like, what's the best of this spot? Like, what is the best thing that I can find? And it is a combination of all of those different elements typically. And it's not enough where like we kind of do it a disservice when we talk about find a river crossing or find a terrain, a pinch point or a funnel. Like, well, which one? Like,
Right.
The best pinch point in the world doesn't matter if there isn't a reason for them to go from point A to point B.
Right.
Like there has to be these compelling reasons. And like when you said like, why? Like, why would I sit here? Why would I do this? Like, you have to ask why about yourself, and you have to ask why about them. Like you have to say, why are they here? Or why are they not here? Or why did I not see anything? Or why did I only see this? Or why, when I was on this crossing, did everybody cross 300 yards upriver? Why? Like, why is that happening? And the more that you ask that, and the more you explore those, like, where's the answer? Man, it's just that, to me, that's the fun part. Like that's when you get out there and you're like, I think like my spidey senses say this is the spot. And then you sit there and all the deer pass by on the hill above you. And you're like, what the hell? Like, why didn't it happen here? And then you move up there and then you see something else going on. That little game, that's so freaking fun.
Yeah. And your why changed, right? You had one data point that set you in that first tree, right? And then the next data point suggested that maybe you should be in a different tree, right? And it's like, it's an iterative process, man. And, but dude, I know we've been doing this for a little over an hour. I could sit here and talk to you for like 5 hours about this. We could go back and forth, but I want to be respectful of your time. I know Mark has you working hard, slaving away. You probably have to do something right after this. I hear he's a slave driver. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, before I let you get going, buddy, why don't you let everyone out there know where they can get up with famous Tony Peterson, where are all the places they can find what you've got going on.
Where they can buy the autographed headshots.
That's right. I better have one in my mailbox soon is all I'm saying.
All my deer stuff's at Meat Eater right now. So it's, meateater.com/wired is, the Wired to Hunt is kind of their destination for all of the whitetail stuff. And so that's where the Foundations podcast, of course, those Wired to Hunt podcasts are all over too. But, the Foundations podcast drop every Tuesday, new articles every single week on the Wired to Hunt page. YouTube videos. We've done so many goddamn YouTube videos lately. It's just been nuts. And so anyway, there's a lot of content there, and it's fun because it's Mark's kind of got a different lane than me. Mark is like, he's kind of into more like private land deer and naming them and the kind of stuff that we know him for. And I'm kind of just like a freaking feral public land guy, just
feral. That's a great way to describe you.
So we kind of, it's kind of we complement each other because he kind of really addresses one crowd and I don't. Like I go a different way. And so it's been pretty freaking fun, man. And I love the ability. This is the first place I've worked at where they're just kind of like, what are your ideas? And like, what do you think people want to hear? Normally it's like, okay, we're doing this, and this. Like it's October, we need a scrape thing. And it's, September and we need this. And they're just like, what do you think the audience wants to hear? And I love that because you know how it is. Like you hear from people all the time who are like, I don't know how to do this, or I don't understand this, or what would you do here? And that, like, I think that there's a lot of value in that. So that's been fun, man.
Yeah, man. Hey, I think you're doing a great job, brother. Truth be told, I tune into your Foundations podcast every week. And I know, and listening to the upfront of it, when you first started it, it's definitely, someone who's newer to hunting, is really going to get a ton out of it. I'm a guy who's been doing it for a while, and I listen to every episode, and there's always something in there that I take away from it. It goes back to what we were talking about of like being open-minded, wanting to expand your neural network, learning as much as you can. And sometimes that means I need to hear something that I've thought I've known for a while, and I need to hear it differently. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, brother, and I'm glad to have you as a voice for this group out in the world. And maybe Mark will have you naming a deer here one of these times.
I always name them. I'm like, oh, that one's Mr. Delicious.
That one tastes
That one's
good.
super tasty. Yeah.
Right.
We have different strategies. Anyway, no, man, I really appreciate it. It's always fun to come on here and BS with you. And I can't wait to get a couple random texts from you this fall with some kill photos.
Yeah, for sure. Well, vice versa, man. I want to grip and grin with you and your little girls. That's what I want. That'll make my season good if I get one of those.
That's goal number 1 this year. So there's a lot of energy being put into that right now. So I hope so.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, brother, you have yourself a good night. Thanks for coming on, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those 2 things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.